All right, we are live. I am so excited to be here today with Dr. Martha Simmons. You know her from Preaching and Preachers. She is on these internet streets. She is live pretty much every Monday, and she has done this for many, many years. I'm excited. I've been on her program a couple of times, and I'm so happy to have her join me today. So, Dr. Martha Simmons, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Good afternoon. I am delighted. You are one of my best guests,
Oh,
and it's just a joy to be with you.
I'm happy that you're here. Well, we've got a challenging topic, but I knew that if there's anyone who could cover it and really bring some insight to this area, I knew it would be you. We're talking about managing congregations and work amidst political and economic pressures. I see you all coming in. I'm so excited that you're here. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Ask any questions as you go along. But real quick, Dr. Simmons, can you just share a little bit with people who you are, the work that you do, and then we're going to get into these questions.
I'm an independent scholar, and I guess I'm going toward 40 years of ordained ministry, longer than that doing it. It just took a moment for the church to say, okay, we will do the ordination for a woman. I just, as my broadcast title says, I love preaching and I care about preachers. And that's where I pretty much spent most of my career, writing about preaching, teaching preaching, helping pastors. I think I've now at 40 helped 48 pastors get into churches. And so that's pretty much what I do, along with building materials for the church, like the African American Lectionary, the 960-page Preaching with Sacred Fire book that I did with Frank Thomas. And I'm right now in the midst of volume 2 of
Yay.
what probably will be a 600-page minister's manual.
That's so exciting. Love the work that you do, and you are such a blessing to the kingdom. We appreciate you. So, listen, I'm going to jump right into these questions. I know that we don't have a ton of time, but we're going to be here probably for about 30 minutes or so. So, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. So, I want to just say this. It's interesting to me as we are in this time of political shifts, right? We are in the season where we have elected a new president as a nation, but yet the old administration is still in place, right? We're in this place of transition. I have gotten the question a surprising amount of time. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but people who are saying, what do you think? What are you anticipating in this upcoming administration? I was talking with a church that is looking to sort of shift how they are classified through the Internal Revenue Service, and they asked, this was just yesterday, Erika, should we be concerned about like how the government may treat us as a tax exempt organization, how the government may treat us as a church? There are political concerns on, it seems to me, people who have both, been blue and red. So I'm really curious, from your perspective, how are you recommending, or what are your thoughts about churches in this political climate, and how pastors and leaders can position themselves in a way to assist both themselves as well as their congregation through this time of transition?
I think what churches and pastors really first need to know is that this is not new for Black folk. Okay, it may be new for some white folk, but it's not new for Black folk. We have always been in periods, whether it's a shift in the president, a shift in the economy, a shift with healthcare, HIV/AIDS, the crack epidemic, you name it. And then, of course, prior to the civil rights movement and go back to Reconstruction, Deconstruction, slavery, this is not new for us. And I really hope that for those to whom it feels new, that they would just check the history. just do some reading of what the Black church has had to endure. So this is not new. So we are definitely, you called it a period of transition. The church, and that's the capital C around the country, is in a period of regression. Churches are closing. Over 1,000 have closed this year, and over 1,000 will close next year. And that's just where we are. In terms of the politics, we know that everything that is negative, that can harm poor people, working class people, that's about to happen again.
Yeah.
And so as the church, that's what we need to remember. It's not new. We know who it's going to happen to. And so we need to act accordingly. And if you want me to, I can get into some of the ways we can go ahead and do things in this season.
Well, I do want to transition to that because what you said is so true. The reality is that I think that we can probably anticipate looking less to government support to the people who may have needs. But I also position it this way. I believe that the church can find its finest hour now to actually stand up and be that gap filler. Be what the church has always been, right? The church is a resource. Now, again, I was raised in the church. I always tell the story that my mom was my Sunday school teacher. My dad was the head trustee of our church. I have always been in the church since a kid. And I think about all the resources that the church just naturally provides, sometimes without even really putting a label on it. So I was sharing with my husband yesterday, my son is going to be singing this song, right? He got this position, this role in a big production that's coming up in his school. So it's really kind of neat. And I'm saying to my husband, like, you know, the way that I learned to sing was being a kid, being the sunbeams, right? Being in the choir, like singing in the choir. Yeah, the little sunbeams and all the way up. But that's how I learned how to sing. That nobody I didn't have like these formal lessons and all that kind of thing, but it came from the church. And the same as I think about, like I look at as people are aging, right? The church is often that place where you have someone who comes out to visit you. You know, they send someone when people are not doing well. Like I look at just how the church operates. It is such a critical component. And I think that now more than ever, hi, George Jackson, hi, Rebecca Pooler, glad you all are here. I think more than ever, the church is just going to need to stand up in a huge way to minister to people in the way that really government, I'm not even sure it was ever meant to be that, but for sure, God has called the church to be of service. And we more than ever, even though resources can be a challenge, and we're going to get to that. But what are some ways that you would say, Dr. Simmons, churches can really step up and be that, be what church has always been, right? Or always meant to be?
I think the first thing, if the church is going to step up and in this season, and it's a difficult season, the church has to catch up with technology. It just has to catch up.
Say it again.
It has to catch up. The church, the average church, opens its doors every Sunday or Saturday for just my 7-day Adventist friends with fewer than 75 people. Fewer than 75 people. Okay? Every weekend, that's the number. Whether it's a white church, black church, Latino, or Asian, that's the number. Okay. Now, a church that size or smaller, they can only do so much. And many of those pastors of those churches, they're only there part-time. They're working a secular job to feed their families.
Yes, bivocational. Okay?
So if all of that's the case, the only way you are going to make it in this season is to catch up with technology. And technology will give you a secretary when you can't afford one. It will count things for you. It will send out your emails and your texts, etc. It will do that for you when you can't afford staff people, can't afford to put together curriculums, all of those kinds of things. Technology will now do that for you.
I love it.
Unless you want to burn yourself out or run out of resources, you've got to catch up. Secondly, you've got to collaborate. Your church is too small to do it all. So when we talk about churches stepping up and being a resource, they cannot do it alone, especially in this difficult season. So there are churches, there are churches that know how to work with government entities and how to work around them, how to make them serve the people and what to do when they don't. So if your church is not one of those churches, catch up with people who are and collaborate. Your church is too small to try to do it all. So why not collaborate, which I always assumed was what churches were supposed to be doing anyway. They were supposed to be doing it anyway. And the third thing I would say to churches in this difficult season where the government is going to help less and has never helped a great deal is to let AI resources and databases like Candid help you get grants so that you can add an extra $25,000, $50,000 to your budget to do some of the things that people need at this critical time. Candid is the largest database of grants, and the grants are out there, and we have to go and get them. And AI, for all the people who say, I don't know how to write grants, I can't afford a grant writer, AI will help you do probably 80% of your grant writing.
So let me just repeat what I heard you say. You made 3 powerful points, and I want to make sure I highlight them. You said that churches right now, today, in this time of transition, in this difficult age, there are 3 things you want every church to consider. The first thing is technology, letting technology assist you. Number 2, you talked about collaboration, which I think is key. Really churches coming together. Sometimes you see multiple churches in one small area, right? One road, one street, one block, but collaborating, working together. And the third thing is, I heard you specifically call out grants and seeking grants. Now, I just want to say, related to that, I love it. I love that concept of churches pursuing grants. I want to point out, and maybe this is a time that I can kind of mention, one of the things I feel so strongly about is churches really being positioned for these things.
Absolutely.
Too often, I've seen circumstances, for example, a church that pursued a grant, but didn't do the legwork to make sure that they were all in compliance on the front end.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, didn't obtain the $100,000 grant that it could have obtained, right? Because there are things like ensuring that you're in good standing, making sure that your bylaws are in order, making sure that your tax exempt status is in place and that it hasn't been revoked. And that's a big reason why I want to mention that we created it's called Faithful Foundations membership, where we walk you through the protocols and the process of making sure that your church is in compliance, so that, as Dr. Simmons is saying, this is a great time to really retool and really see how your church can access some of the grants and some of the things that may be out there for foundations, et cetera. And it may be what may make the most sense. Sometimes you can do it in the name of the church, but sometimes it's your community outreach, right? So maybe you create a separate entity that's focused on community outreach. But the bottom line is, I can't remember where the scripture is. You might remember it better than I, but how it says, why sit we here and die, right?
And die. You don't have to and let me also say about Candid, coupled with what you do, because you understand Black churches especially. But Candid has more than 100 workshops and online resources to help those who've never written grants and do not understand how the process, getting your stuff in order, and etc. So you, after they've done some online stuff, then you can say, take them and say, okay, now let's go do the stuff you missed. Let's go do
Yeah.
the stuff they don't understand about
Yeah.
churches.
Yes.
Because Candid is a database for all kinds of nonprofits,
Love
not
it.
mainly churches. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, like I said, what you all do, and then what Candid, which is a huge database. Yes, there's a fee for it, but it's free if you go to the library. It's free if 4 or 5 churches come together and pay for it. It's pennies. Okay. So,
Love it.
yeah, you definitely need to know and be prepared if you want to get a grant.
So I want to shift and ask this question that kind of related to the foundation we've established already. What are some of the practical steps that pastors can take to maintain their health and growth of their congregations when budgets are shrinking, but expectations are growing? I mean, this is the reality, right? We've got shrinking budgets, but that doesn't mean that the needs of the people aren't still significant. Sometimes we are already talking about how some of the government resources that may have been in place, we're literally looking at entire, I don't know how this will all play out, but we know what's been said, right? Whether it's the Department of Education or any other area where perhaps we would expect to have supports. If these things are eliminated, how would you see, like, what are some practical steps that you would mention to pastors to maintain their own well-being, because that is a big important part of this, as well as the well-being of their congregations?
First, I would say to pastors, you are responsible for your own health. So if you don't know that you're supposed to exercise, how much sleep you need, and that you might need a therapist, the church is not going to provide that for you. Okay. You have to be an adult and take care of yourself. Churches don't take care of pastors. Okay. They don't, especially small churches. So be aware of that. I'm just going to keep it real and tell it to you like it is. In terms of practical steps that can take, churches, especially small churches, need to do some assessment.
Yes.
We never do assessment. We just keep doing whatever we've been doing, no matter whether it's working or not. We don't do any assessment. So whether it's a survey or you have what's called a secret worshiper who comes in and views your church and tells you this is what I saw, online survey, whatever tool you use, let the people tell you their truth. It may not be the truth, but it's their truth. Let the people tell you what they're sensing, what's going on. Then you need to tell the people the truth. You need to tell the people the truth. You need to tell them this is how much we got in the bank. Here are our bills. And these are how many volunteers we have. And so this is what we can do. This is what we cannot do. What matters to the church? And like I said, you already asked them what matters to them. So they've told you. So now you can turn around and say, okay, here's what we agree on. And then you start to work with that. If you want your church to grow, though, and these are hard growth times, churches are emptying out everywhere. You can go online. Those big churches, those mega churches that used to be full, they are not. I don't care. There's only 1 or 2 churches, or in that 2%.
Yeah.
They're the only ones that are still okay, right? But even some of them have lost thousands. Every church, okay, the membership has gone down. So if you want to hold on to what you got and perhaps increase it slightly, okay, you've got to do outreach.
Yes.
The people are not coming to your door.
Yes.
They may find you online, but they may not.
Yes.
You've got to do the outreach, and you need to become known in your community for doing at least one thing. So
Yeah.
your one thing might be adopting a school, not a high school, but a grammar school. And you make sure that those children in that school eat, because some of the money that has fed children is going away.
Yes.
It is probably going away. Schools may get less from the Department of Education, but you've adopted a grammar school.
Yes.
And you're going to help that school make it. And you become known for that.
Yes.
People will see you and be attracted to that. And
before you go into your next point, Dr. Simmons, I just want to insert something here. I think the key, and I'm, definitely want to hear the rest of that list. What I think we're really getting at here is that it's important for churches to get beyond the walls, right? And this has always been necessary. This has always been critical. But I think what we're saying is now it is more critical than it's ever been, because we know that the unchurched, unfortunately, is that's the most growing contingency in this country now. Right. It's not any particular denomination. It's not whether we're talking about Catholic versus Protestant. It's the unchurched. So the reality is that the churches that I'm seeing be most successful are the churches who are doing exactly as you're saying. They have an outreach, but it may not look like, hey, we're passing out tracts, right? It may not be that kind of.
No, it's not that.
I would say outreach, but it is having some sort of, really, it's what Jesus said. You're meeting a temporal need. So whether we're talking about food, whether we're talking about clothing, whether we're talking about one church, I love what they do. They actually provide a place where people can wash their clothes. So you're just talking about laundering, or you're talking about single parents who may need a place to have have some support for when they need to run errands or whatever that looks like. So I just want to highlight that a part of this, I think, is us being a bit more expansive in the way that we see the church in the community.
It's always necessary. It's always necessary. The Bible says, go to the hedges and the highways.
Yes.
This is hedges and highways time.
Yes.
This is the time. The hedges and the byways, and they're now highways. This is the time.
This is the time.
This is the time. If you've never done it before, if you've been insular and just took care of your people, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. You got to get out there.
I want to point out some of the things that are in the comments as well. Annette, glad that you're here. Glad to see you. So some people are talking about the house church, church and technology, church apps, mobile church, and even drive-through church, and the fact that the church is the community and the community is the church. So yes, absolutely agree as to those points. And I think it's really key that we think about church outside of the perspective of just the worship service, right? Because that's a limited time for the most part during the week.
It's limited.
And we don't want to we appreciate the predictable activities. I'm not saying that we don't do those things, but I also will love to see some of the less predictable activities. Sometimes the church was in an uproar related to Roe versus Wade, and it's overturning. But I have to say, I don't see a lot of signs in front of our churches around, if you're pregnant and you need to make a decision, we will help you, right? We will be a resource.
That's not what Black churches tend to do.
Yes, but I want us to really reevaluate some of the things that we've tended to do, some of the predictable areas, and maybe it be a bit more expansive.
We've got to expand. Yeah. If we don't expand for the next 4 years, we will crumble. We will join the lot of those churches that just closed.
Yes.
Because nobody knew they were there. They weren't giving services to the community. They were insular. They're going to close.
And that's that. And we really want you to recognize too that you don't have to be a mega church to be quote unquote successful, right? We're not going to spend a whole bunch of time there, but I just want to make that comment that, as you have said, most churches are, I guess the average size of a church is like 100, 125.
No, it's smaller than that.
75?
Yeah. It's about 75. Everybody likes to hang on to that 100 number because it's been around a while, but they're smaller than that actually. And they have always been the backbone. I think for some reason people get confused and think most churches are large. No, 2% are the mega churches, 20% are the mid-size, and everything else, that's it. So that's what, 78% basically. Those are the churches. Those are the ones that have to change and go outside. The mid-size and the mega churches, they're doing it already. It's the everyday churches that the communities need. And it has nothing to do with size. It has to do with vision and care for your community. That's all it needs. Yeah.
I love that. It's not about size. It's about vision and care for the community.
That's right.
So we could talk about this so much longer, Dr. Simmons, but we only have about 2 minutes or so. We need to wrap up. I want to know if you can speak to a little bit more about how you recommend church leaders manage volunteers and volunteer burnout. So we've talked about the church leader, right? We talked a bit about the church leader, and you said the church leader is responsible for his or her own health. And I love that. I mean, that's absolutely right. Like, your church isn't going to take care of your health. Like, you got to make sure you go to bed, you get some sleep, you exercise, you have a good diet, right? So I love that it's really the onus is on the leader in that sense. We do want churches to.
But let me get to the volunteers. Let's get to the volunteers and stopping that burnout. Number one, stop the programs that no one is using. They're not using them anyway. But you got a couple of old people still holding on to them, taking up church electricity, time, and everything, holding on to them. And yes, they will fight you to the death when you get ready to get rid of them. But you've got to figure out ways to move on for those programs. That's burning out volunteer time. It's just not. And tell people, look, go home and enjoy your family. Go help the community, etc. We're cutting back some of these programs. And then stop creating new programs that nobody asked for. It's always interesting to me to watch pastors come in and say, "Ooh, I got the vision. And this is what God told me," and etc. And they set up these rubrics for these programs, and nobody does them. Except the same 10%, same 7%. And those people are worn out. And the reality is nobody asked for that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Nobody asked for it, which is why I said you've got to do the assessment. You really got to do the assessment, whether it's in the church, and asset map your community. Assess them too. You know, you've got entities in your community that will help you. They'll want to work with churches, but you don't even know they're there because you haven't walked your community in 10 years. So you don't know that there's no longer a restaurant right up the street from you. You don't know about the daycare center and who runs it. You don't know that you've got one of the generals living in your neighborhood who can tell you everything that's gone on there for the last 40 years. You don't know the assets in your community. You don't know the assets in your church because you've never done the assessment, walked your community, done the asset mapping. So if you want to take care of your volunteers, you've got to figure out who's who and what are the programs that are critical. And yes, this is an entitlement age, but we've only got so many hours. And so churches can't do it all. Yes. So find one or two things that you do well and do those, and let your volunteers go home and stop burning them out.
Well, you're gonna save a lot of people right there. So we'll have to wrap up the conversation and plan to have this discussion. I would love to have another time. I also want to mention, as we are coming toward the end of the year, this is the kind of thing that churches, I hope, are considering, what do you want the next year to look like? What is your plan for 2025? What is your plan for programs? Also, there are some important legal matters that are necessary for the end of the year. We have a free webinar that's coming up next week. So I'll also ask my admin to drop that. It's a free webinar on end of the year checklist. So this is a part of the end of the year checklist that we want every church to be aware of. We want to make sure that anything that is necessary as the IRS requires it, that you are aware. It's a free webinar, and I want to make sure that that's available to you. So Dr. Simmons, thank you so much as always for your time,
welcome.
for your bevy of wisdom, for all the work that you do. I implore everyone to take advantage of the incredible writing and resources that she provides, as well as.
And you all tune in to Attorney Cole's end of the year information, because when the new year starts, some things are going to be different.
It's going to be different.
Do not act like you didn't know and you didn't know what to do about it. She's a resource.
We're here to let you know. Blessings so much. We'll let everybody go. Have a great rest of the day.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay.